Hi, I'm Dr. Donald DeFabio, and welcome to Spotlight on Berkeley Heights. We're here at the Littell Lord Farmhouse and Museum for 4 centuries in a day to get some history on Berkeley Heights and one of the earlier structures we have here. With us is the president of the Historical Society of Berkeley Heights, Dr. Merrill Main, and Dan Palladino, also of the Historical Society. Gentlemen, thanks for coming down today. Merrill, tell us a little bit about the Lord Littell Farmhouse.
Well, this is a property that dates back to the middle 1700s, the colonial period of the United States, settled by a family, the Littell family, a weaver, a farmer, his wife, 7 children. This was, of course, the westernmost tip of Elizabethtown at that time. That's what Berkeley Heights was. But this was pretty much the middle of nowhere, probably settled here because there was a spring right outside. And this farmstead is preserved as a historic place for visitors, bought with Green Acres monies, owned by the township of Berkeley Heights.
Well, I know we're going to be taking a tour shortly with some of the local brownies that came in, and they've been getting a lot of exposure today with people in town have been coming. In fact, people that have been brought up in the town came for the first time today. Dan, why is it so important that Berkeley Heights residents and as well as the people in general get involved with the history of Berkeley Heights?
One of the reasons today with our mobile society, so many people move in and move out of various towns and spend different amounts of time periods in different towns through their life. One of the reasons is to learn about the town they live in, to preserve the history. I mean, that this town or any other town just evaporated overnight. To learn the history, to understand that there was a history, there were people that lived before them and led entire lives, and there was a community here, and part of learning about your country and your state is to learn about history. And to preserve the history is our duty, really, to respect the people that came before us. And that's what we're trying or attempting to do here, is to preserve this house, the number of decades and centuries that it has existed, and to interpret what life used to be so that the children, everyone's children that come, and the adults can understand and get a glimpse as to life in the past.
Now, Merrill, how can people get involved with the Berkeley Heights Historical Society? Because it is a volunteer organization, and that means volunteer hours and manpower is always welcome and needed. How can they get involved?
Well, they can come visit us 3rd Sunday, May through October, or in the meanwhile, they can give either of the co-presidents a call, 908-464-3947 and 908-771-8875. We just want people to be members. Anybody who wants to be active, that's even better. But we won't bother you to be active, because just being a member lets the town know that you think that this property is worth restoring, worth maintaining, and worth preserving for history.
So there's a real grassroots effort going on right now just to encourage Berkeley Heights residents to become involved with our history and let them know that it's essential that we maintain it.
Absolutely. If you give us a call, we'll send you information about the farmstead. We'll send you a membership brochure. Membership is just a nominal fee, very small fee. But mostly it's just to let the town know that people who live here are interested in preserving not everything that's old in the town, but a few things that go back in history. And an 18-acre farmstead that has buildings that date back to 1760 and possibly earlier, well worth preserving.
In fact, this is recognized as one of the oldest farmstead properties intact in the entire county, one of the largest pieces of property that is intact in the entire county. Most of the farms and farmsteads have long ago been turned over by the bulldozer, and we're trying to preserve something in this town, which was rural Union County not so many years ago. And preservation of that and understanding of your own town is a good thing.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for making a difference, because that's what it takes to get involved, is to make a difference. So thank you very much. I encourage everyone to come down and visit the Lord Littell House. You'll be very, very amazed at what's right here in your backyard. And let's go take the tour with those brownies. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, let's.
All right, here we go.
Welcome to the Littell Lord Farmstead Museum. This part of the house dates back to 1760, really old. So more than how many years old? More than 200 years old. So really old. And this part of the house at that time belonged to Andrew Littell, his wife, and 7 children. 9 people lived in this house. The house at that time only had this room up to the white line and the pole that you see in there, and the loft above. The whole family would sleep in the loft up there. 9 people would sleep in the loft, which was as big as this room, that room up to the white line, and this room, right above our heads. 9 people would sleep. The family would do most of their living in this house. And where do you think they would cook?
Over there.
Well, see, that was a kitchen that was added on 100 years after they were living here. But when they were living here, this was the middle of nowhere, and they didn't have iron stoves. They had fireplaces.
They'd use the fire.
They'd use the fireplace. But the fireplace then, see the cut in the floor? The fireplace then, I would have been burning up in the fireplace. Because the whole fireplace was this big in this whole corner here. See the picture? It would have been like this fireplace. And they would have done cooking for the whole family of 9 people in this fireplace. They would have used pots with little legs on them, they called Dutch ovens. They would have used things like this. Any guesses what that is? Okay, you can turn it so that you can get to both sides. Want to guess?
A rotisserie.
Well, that's a good guess,
Good for bagels.
but not right. Oh, now you're really close. You could do bagels if they had bagels. Yes.
To cook both sides of the food.
Of the food, yes. What kind of food do you think?
Well, bagels are close.
I know.
Bread. There you go. Bread, sure. It's a toaster. It's the equivalent in the colonial period of a toaster. In the colonial period, though, the neighbors were really far away. Nobody was close by. This was the middle of nowhere. The people were living out here, they were farming. They were farming, and Andrew Littell was a weaver. And they settled here probably because, did you see that little stone building right out there? The spring flows around 2 sides of the building. So it's really damp, and it's really dark. But what do you think? Why do you think they would want a spring flowing around their building like that?
So they could have a lot of water.
Well, that's why they wanted the spring there, so they could have a lot of water. But they had that stone building there in order to keep things cool. So that was like a colonial period refrigerator. They would put their milk, and they would put their meat, and they would put their cheese hanging from hooks and on shelves in that stone house. And the spring comes out of the ground really cool all year round, and so it keeps the stone house cool. But that's also probably why the family settled here, because like you said, they would have water. So now, any questions about this room I can answer for you? By the way, these are original floorboards, 200 plus years old, original ceiling joists, original nails that we discovered when we took down the newer parts of the building. These are hand-cut nails, just stuck in the ceiling, right? They don't look like your house, because you wouldn't have nails sticking out everywhere in your house like that. Why do you think they had nails there? By the way, we're not totally sure, but so your guess is as good as mine.
So that the wood can stay up.
Well, these nails, yeah, they would use nails to hold the wood up, but these nails are not holding the wood up. These nails are just kind of sticking out here.
I know.
Go ahead.
The whole thing.
The whole thing, sure. Like maybe like this, they might hang some herbs to dry in their house. Because the family would have done most of their living outdoors, but actually in the indoor living would be in this room. They would have, they're eating in this room, they're cooking in this room. If they were sitting around reading, they would be in this room. So this was the major room that they would live in. This would be a storage cabinet from the colonial period. What's in here is just stuff that we have stored. That the museum stores. We don't usually open it for folks, but I'll show you what's in it. Doesn't really matter. So they would live with some bed bugs. They would live with some mice because they didn't seal up their houses very well. And that all has to do with that thing right there on the wall. Anybody want to guess what that would be for? Yes.
A thing to catch the mice.
That's a good guess, but it's not right.
Catch the bed bugs.
No, it's not to catch the bed bugs. It's not to catch anything, it's to hold something. Any other guesses? All right, I'll give you a clue. It's a big clue. Yes.
To hold
To
candles.
hold candles. Why would you want to hold candles?
So they won't get ruined or dirty
Ruined is good, but how would they get ruined?
if you just kept them out.
Yeah, but what would ruin them?
The mice would
The mice would eat them. Because they would be made out of animal fat, and the mice would love to eat them. So you might keep them in a tin box like this. But they were also valuable, because if you could make extra candles, you could trade them. Because these were like light bulbs. Everybody needed to see. Everybody needed light bulbs. So if the tinsmith came down the road with a wagon full of tin goods to trade, you didn't have money. And in fact, money wasn't so good in the colonial period out here in the middle of nowhere, because you had to go into town to use money, right? And you could, but good stuff that would help you live and survive was always valuable. And so you might be able to trade, I don't know, I would be guessing, but I would guess 5, 10 candles maybe for maybe a thing like this. Because the tinsmith needed candles too. And the household down the street needed candles too. Because everybody needed candles. There were no light bulbs. There were no gas lights. Candles. But so that you didn't want the mice to eat them. Because they were made out of animal fat, the mice would love them. And if you lost them, you lost a lot of good work and stuff you could trade.
So what if the mice fit a hole in the tin?
Well, this is tin. Mice can't really bite a hole in it. And it's up on a wall like this so that the mice have trouble climbing up to it. Right? They would really, I mean, it would be hard for a mouse to get in here when it's right up, mounted on a wall, and closed like this. And biting through, they couldn't bite through. This is metal. Their teeth wouldn't be good enough to bite through the metal.
They would break their teeth.
They would break their teeth. There were a few other families in the meantime after the Littell family, but then the Lord family bought this in the late 1800s. By this time, this was not the middle of nowhere. By this time, there were railroads close by. Yes, that's very exciting. Railroads are very exciting. Because now they could get manufactured stuff here, and they could get into New York City, and Mr. Lord was an attorney in New York City. So this was now no longer a farm that they needed to live, but a farm that they had for pleasure. Yes?
What is that red thing?
That red thing is just an album where you would have people sign that they had visited you.
But nobody signed.
Well, there are some people who have been here. Here's someone from Vermont.
Vermont? I went to Vermont.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What's that right there?
That's an organ, and that organ comes from the church on Martine Avenue in Scotch Plains.
It's a piano.
No, it's actually an organ. Very similar to piano, keyboard.
It doesn't even work.
Well, it would work if you were to pedal it probably still. But let's not use it, it's
Careful,
very
girls.
old.
Girls, you know, it's very fragile.
See, the Lord family they would go to church in Scotch Plains because the road here didn't go through. This was a lane. We can see that in the 1902 map upstairs. This was a lane. They could go that way down to Scotch Plains to church. Now, in the 1960s, when this property was purchased by the town of Berkeley Heights, everything had been auctioned off except for some of those walking sticks. Whoops. And a couple of years ago, that table with the mirror in the bottom was donated to us. That, on the back, that was auctioned off in this house. And yes,
How did they get the rug in here?
they would get the rug in here the same way as we would get the rug in here. They would have it brought by, well, not quite. They would have it brought by railroad, and then they would install it once it got here. It would probably be manufactured at that point in New York City. Yes.
Why did they have like a piano and organ?
Well, in the Victorian period, there was no television, there was no radio, and so the family would entertain itself by learning to play music, and by reading, and by writing, and by talking. But they would have pianos, and they would have organs and stuff like that in the house so that they could entertain themselves. Yes.
What is that?
What is what? This? This, yes. This is a lantern. This is a source of light in the Victorian period. You would put oil in the bottom, and there's a wick, and you would light the wick, and there'd be a little flame, almost like a candle, but not a candle, a lamp. This is also very old. Be careful, very gentle. This is, yes.
What's in here?
What's in here is music, because they were very much into music that they would play in the Victorian period. This would be a music cabinet for sheet music that they could put right up here in front of them and read the music and play the music. Yes? It opens just like that.
Wow, they actually wrote some of it?
They would buy sheet music. They would buy music like this. Let's see, here's some sheet music. They would buy music like this. And they would, that's right. See, there's new piano music. A copy of the book A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, who was very popular in the Victorian period as an author. This is a pen that you would dip in an inkwell. That's a case for the pen. That's to save your pen.
And that's what they were.
We don't have an inkwell here, but you would have a little jar with some ink in it. Here's my question for you. Why do you think there's a mirror in the bottom of that table? Go ahead.
So they could see themselves.
They could see themselves, but why is it so low?
Oh.
Go ahead.
So it won't get ruined.
That's a good guess, but that's not why it's so low.
To see if there's like any bugs in the place.
No, that's a good guess from the other part of the house where there were bugs. No, but it does have to do with the fact probably that roads weren't well paved at that time. The Victorian era was a very formal period. You would never be wearing pants. Young ladies would be wearing skirts that would be full length down to their shoes, and probably some of you would already have begun wearing hoop skirts, and probably some of you would have begun wearing corsets.
What's corset?
Well, corsets are pieces of material that wrap around your waist that have bone or something like bone in them, or later on metal, that make you have an hourglass figure that crunch in your waist, and over your lifetime you actually would distort your ribs in some cases, would distort your bodies in some cases, because they wanted you to look like this in the Victorian period. Yes?
How did they get that picture?
How did they get that picture? They painted that picture with oil paint. So what do you think the mirror is down there for? You're wearing long skirts. That's by an entryway into the house. What do you think? Go ahead.
To see if there's any bugs on them.
To see if there's any mud on your skirt as you're walking into the house. To make sure that the petticoats aren't showing underneath your skirt. To make sure that your ankles aren't showing underneath your skirt. And to make sure there aren't any mud on your shoes and your petticoat and stuff. Yes?
What are petticoats?
Petticoats are the material that goes underneath the skirt to make it billow out nicely. There's also sometimes hoops under there. You'll see some hoops upstairs. They're metal rings.
Yeah, I saw that.
Sometimes wooden rings early on. Yes?
And with the things that you put on, like around your ribs, didn't some ladies like faint because they were a little too tight?
They would tighten them up to the point where you would have trouble breathing, and sometimes you would faint because you had trouble breathing. All for style purposes. But while you were dressed up so uncomfortably, the good news is that you would only have to take a bath once a week, once a month, something like that. Well, you would stink, but at least, you wouldn't have to. Not only would you take a bath once a week or once a month, but the bath would be filled from water boiled on the wood-burning stove or coal-burning stove, and by tradition, it would be poured into a tin or tin-coated tub, and then, by tradition, your father would take a bath first, then your mother would take a bath in the same water, and then your oldest brother or sister would take a bath in the same water, and then the next oldest would take a bath in the same water, and the next oldest and next oldest. And by the time you got to the baby, the water would be so dirty that if you dropped the baby into the water, you would have trouble seeing the baby. So you ever heard the saying about don't throw out the baby with the bath water?
No.
Well, There is a saying like that. Yes.
Where would they be taking a bath?
They would be taking a bath in the kitchen. So they wouldn't have to carry the water after it was heated very far. They would put a tub in the kitchen. They would pour water that was heated in a big pot on top of the stove into the tub. They would take a bath right in the kitchen. No running water, no bathroom at the time. Yes.
Did they have anything to clean themselves with, like soap?
Sure, they had soap. They, at the time, in the Victorian period, they could buy soap. In the colonial period, they would have made soap right on the site here.
But would the soap look like squared?
The soap would be made in cakes. Sure, even in the colonial period, the soap would be made in cakes. But in the colonial period, the soap would be made out of wood ashes that you pour water through, I think, to make lye, and animal fat, more animal fat. Yes.
How did they go to the bathroom?
They went to the bathroom in an outhouse, or during the middle of the night. I'll show you when we get upstairs. Other questions? Okay, let's go upstairs then.
This would be strictly a playroom versus a bedroom, or?
This would be a bedroom, and it would be a playroom for children to play in. But by this point, the families are wealthier. The house that's built next door by the Lords, Mary Lord had the lower portion built with a large area simply for her grandchildren to play. Children were dressed up like little adults, and they were still very formal, but they weren't treated like adults still. Like in the colonial period, they were made to work like adults. By the Victorian period, there was a childhood, and they would have a childhood and they would play. They would have toys, like the little toy oven. They would have toys like the toy bank, jacks and balls, various games.
That's a cute little stove.
Yes.
I just found out when you put a penny in here, it goes in here and then it ends up in here.
Yes, it does.
But then how do you get it out?
Well, we don't have it closed on the bottom, so if you lift it up, the penny will probably drop out.
How did pennies drop out?
How did what? I'm sorry.
How did pennies drop out?
Well, there's a hole in the bottom. Lift them up.
I'm gonna try. Put all the shots. Let's put a lot in there. I know, but don't touch anything on this side.
Don't trust anything on that side.
Let me touch anything.
Those are very old also. But you can touch them a little bit. But be very careful because they're 100 years old.
Don't touch, Mikey, don't touch.
He can touch these things, but not these things.
Those are newer.
Let's put a
Those are
lot
reproductive.
Wow. A baby would actually sleep in there.
Okay, why don't we step out here and you can come back in here later if you want. That was William Woodruff's desk, and that simply was a place to set things.
But what would they use for these shots?
They didn't have, paper was very expensive. You might not have had paper enough to write on in school, and you might have written your assignments on a chalkboard.
Yeah,
So-
but where would be the chalk?
The chalk would be in your desk. The chalk would be in there.
Where? I can't see.
Well, we don't have any chalk in there, but the chalk would be in there. That's a book. You might have a book in your desk. Careful, very old.
That was William Woodruff's desk as schoolmaster,
When he
or?
was schoolmaster.
And that dates back to when?
Well, he lived apparently between 1886 and 1935. We're not sure of the exact date of the desk, but it was a desk that belonged to him, and he was the first schoolmaster. Now, this is furnished like an adult's bedroom might have been in the Victorian era. And since you asked about going to the bathroom, I'll ask you to look around the room and see what you see that has to do with that.
What is that?
That would be a kerosene heater. That would be for heating the room. Well, see this nice thing? What do you think that is?
To catch mice?
It's not to catch mice, no.
To go to the bathroom.
Yeah, that's what it's for. Now, some people see these things and they think that they're like a soup pot. But here's what you would do with this. This would go in here. And then in the middle of the night, so you didn't have to walk all the way to the outhouse, especially in the winter because there would be snow on the ground, you would open that up and use that. So that's like a potty chair.
It's just like my brother's chair. It's like a small chair, and you had to lift it up to take it out, and then you had to pour it into a real potty to flush it
Yes,
down.
but you see, they didn't have real potties. So what do you think they did with that in the morning?
Money would go outside and throw it in the woods.
Well, that's a good guess, but see, that was part of life, and that was a lot of work to go walk into the woods. Yes.
Put it in that the little house thing.
In an outhouse,
Yeah.
but that was still a lot of work, and this was all just a part of life. I'm afraid to say, yes, I'm afraid to say that they would just open the window usually and pour it out.
Ew.
Yes. Aren't you glad you live nowadays instead of in those days?
Yes. Yes.
And if you lived in the city and you were up 2 or 3 stories and you opened the window to pour this out, the polite thing to do is to say, mind the water.
What does mind the water mean?
It means try to jump away quickly. And it also means don't look up,
Don't look. Why?
because the person is pouring a chamber pot out their window.
A what pot?
Chamber pot. This is called a chamber pot. Goes in a potty chair like that, and it's for going to the bathroom in. And they would pour it out the window in the morning.
Would they be that decorative in
Oh, yes.
general?
What
Sure.
about in winter?
Yeah, this is an antique chamber pot, and they would make them very decorative, very nice looking. Some people buy them in antique stores or in flea markets, and they think that they're good soup tureens. And sometimes people have been quite shocked when they find out what it was used for historically, after they end up serving some guests some soup in the pot. With the apple peeler, you just put the apple on these spikes. In this position, put the apple on the spikes, release the razor blade. It would sit against the apple. Here's the razor blade. And as you spin it around, the apple would have its skin cut off. By the time you get over there, you have a pretty much peeled apple. This model, looking like this, is still being sold, still being made and still being sold. In fact, LL Bean was selling one very similar, but of course with a lot of stainless steel and everything. Yes.
What do we use that for?
That would be used just for any kind of vegetables that you wanted to heat, cook, store. It's a pot. This is a butter churn. Put milk in it, raw milk. Keep turning the handle. There's little paddles inside. Eventually the butter fat separates out from what's called buttermilk. This is a spring house, and I'll show you inside there. This is the spring. This is just a shed to cover it to keep some of the leaves and stuff out, even though there are still leaves inside of it.
And why is there a door behind you?
Well, quite likely a higher door like that would be put in so that in case they wanted to put some ice in the bottom in the winter, ice and straw and hay, make it into an ice house instead of just a spring house, which would be colder and which would give them a supply of ice. They could get to whatever they stored in here from a higher door.
Well, thanks for tuning in to Spotlight on Berkeley Heights, and I want to thank you girls for the tour. Did you learn some neat things about the Lord Littell house?
That people used a chair to go to the bathroom with roll. Yeah.
And what did you learn about
I learned that they used these little compartments on the walls to put the candles in so then the mice wouldn't eat the candles.
Yeah. Candles were pretty important back then, weren't they? Yeah, they sure were. What did you girls learn?
I learned that, well, all the stuff that they had to cook with was metal.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yes.
When you wash your hands, there's going to be a bowl.
Yeah, well, they used the big bowl with the water and the pitcher into it. Excuse me.
That the thing in the bowl you had to throw out in the window and don't look up and run away.
Yeah, it was pretty silly, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Did you have fun, Kathleen?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, everybody look over and say, Spotlight on Berkeley Heights, TV 36.
Spotlight on 36.
Thumbs up. Come on, thumbs up. Yeah.